All right. So if you remember last week, we talked about the lost civilization of Roanoke. We started talking about Jamestown. We learned about Pocahontas and so on. And now we're going to start talking about the Plymouth colony. So we're going to work more into the 13 colonies and stuff. So John Smith was a rover, a restless man who liked to be on the move. So that means he wasn't happy just being where he was. In 1609, he left Jamestown and returned to England. By 1614, Smith was eager to see America again. So he had left for about 5 years, and when he returned, he was like ready to be in America. Page 12 and 13 is where we are. Alexander and Isaiah. I don't want to see you two looking at each other. We're just going to look at our magazine, okay? He and his crew set off in 2 whaling ships for North America. So whaling ships would be ships that like were used to like hunt whales and stuff. But regardless, they're in ships. They're headed to America. It's 1614. The people paying for the voyage expected them to return with fresh whale meat. But catching whales proved more difficult than expected. So while most of the crew fished and traded furs, Smith and a few others explored the coast. So they were on these whaling ships, and they're supposed to come back with whales. But John Smith and some of his people weren't really doing that. They were exploring the coast of America. They weren't really worried about the whole whaling thing. As they traveled as far north as southern Canada and as far south as Cape Cod, Smith named the place New England and created a map for it. Remember, they don't have satellite technology to make maps. He had to create it himself. When he got back to England, he wrote a book called A Description of New England. The book and map were published in 1616. On his map, Smith named one location New Plymouth, and in his book, he called it an excellent good harbor, good land, and said that the only thing it lacked was hard-working people. 4 years later, partly thanks to Smith's book, those people arrived. So, John Smith wrote this book because, he was supposed to be whaling and fishing, but instead he just had got to explore. Lucky guy. Why are you guys crying? If you're at home, pause real quick. Anyways, so he wrote this book, and he said that this place, this New England place, specifically New Plymouth, was excellent land, okay? Good harbor, excellent land. It just needs hardworking people. And guess what? 4 years later, people went. So if this book was published in 1616, 4 years later from 1616 is 1620. So in that section, I would just like you to highlight, he wrote a book called The Description of New England. And I also want you to the next sentence, the book and map were published in 1616. Then I would like you to highlight, in his book, he called it Excellent Land and Harbor. And then I also want you to highlight 4 years later, partly because of Smith's book, those people arrived. So that last little bit. Because that's important that, he wasn't the only reason, but, he wrote this book. He made this map. People are eager to get there. People already wanted to leave. So he's partially to take responsibility for people rolling out and coming to New England / New Plymouth in the Americas. And the next section is at the bottom. And it says, in New England, the Church of England was the official church. And remember, this was, hundreds of years ago, so people didn't have freedom of religion like we do now, where you can practice any religion you want. Like, the official church was the Church of England, and guess what? That was the church everyone was going to. Those who did not join could be punished, okay? So, like, you could get in trouble if you were not part of this church. One group disagreed with some of the church's beliefs. They were called separatists because they separated themselves from the Church of England. Seeking freedom to worship as they wanted, they went to the Netherlands, but they didn't like it there. When some of them read John Smith's description of New England, they thought it would be a place where they could build the society they wanted. This group did not call themselves separatists, nor did they call themselves pilgrims. They later became known as pilgrims because a pilgrim is a person who makes a journey for religious reasons. So we definitely need to highlight that last little part here, because pilgrims is one of our vocab words. Pilgrim is a person who makes a journey for religious reasons. I'm trying to think what else is really important in that. I mean, the majority of it is important because these are the people that are like, you know, they are the ones that want their own religious freedom. They don't want to have to be just part of the Church of England. They're finding that unfair, and they weren't happy with the Netherlands for whatever reason. They were like, okay, well, we tried this place, wasn't good. So then they read this book, and then they tried that, and, well, they became pilgrims later on. So I do just want you to highlight in New England, the official church, the Church of England was the official church. Just highlight that. And then if we have a question about church or anything, we can probably find it there. But we have a little bit more about the Virginia Company. And if you remember, the Virginia Company is the people who like funded Jamestown and stuff to begin with. So this is in the middle of the picture with the ship. The Virginia Company agreed to pay for the Pilgrim's voyage. The company would be repaid with lumber and furs. Along with the Pilgrims came adventurers who were looking for a new life. This group of 102 people sailed from Plymouth, England in September of 1620 on the Mayflower. Their journey was long and hard. Food was dried peas and beans and hard biscuits and salted meat. Storms battered the ship for much of the 2 months, soaking the passengers and food. That sounds like a terrible time to me. I would like you to highlight that the Virginia Company agreed to pay for the Pilgrim's voyage. This first sentence. Then I would like you to highlight repaid with lumbers and furs. I also want you to highlight the word, or highlight adventurers looking for a new life, because it wasn't just people who wanted religious freedom. It was also people just looking for a life. Or a new life. And then I want 102 people sailed from Plymouth, England in September of 2006 on the Mayflower. So 102 people were on the Mayflower. And then we know the Mayflower is there. So if you have a question about how the trip on the Mayflower went, you would look there, and the trip was hard. If you would like, you can put, you can also highlight the journey was long and hard if you would like. Up to you. I feel like we know that. Like, anyone that's on a ship for 2 months, we're going to assume it was not a simple task, right? Like, it's not a cruise ship like today's world. Okay, this is 1620. It was not simple just being on a boat for that long. And then I need you to flip over to the next page where the map is. And it's showing us Cape Cod and Plymouth. So it says the Mayflower was aiming for the mouth of the Hudson River. And you can see where the Hudson River is. And so they were trying to get all the way in there where the Hudson River is. See? Mouth of Hudson River. So they were trying to get in here. Like, clearly didn't get there. Blown off course, it first landed on the tip of Cape Cod. The Pilgrims soon traveled on to Plymouth, a good harbor that had been named on John Smith's map. There, in December 1620, 102 passengers disembarked. That means they left the boat and got on land. That's what that means. One baby had been born on the ship, and one passenger had died. So they still ended up with 102 people because one was born, but one passed away. So it went to 103, but then someone died, so it went back to 102. While anchored off Cape Cod, all the adult male passengers signed a document called the Mayflower Compact. In it, they agreed to form a government and obey any law that would later be established for the general good of the colony. So I would like you to highlight this first little bit, or this section right here. Adult males signed a document called the Mayflower Compact. Can someone please tell me why I didn't say all people signed the Mayflower Compact? Why does it say adult males? Why does that matter, John?
Because they have more power.
Right. Remember, women weren't able to own land or things like that. They didn't hold any government position. So only the men had, the power or own stuff. So they were the ones that had to sign it. I want you to highlight first landed on the tip of Cape Cod. And then I would like you to highlight this big chunk that says, traveled onto Plymouth, a good harbor that had been named on John Smith's map. There in 2016, 102 passengers disembarked. That's important to know. Only one person died in 2 months on that trip, so even though it was long and hard, they were able to, the majority of them, make it, all but one. Now there's 102 more people joining the Americas. This is not in your map. What?
Number 7.
I have no idea. Yes. Does anyone want to answer number 7 for me? Is number 7 true or false? John?
True.
I disagree. It is false. They first wanted to go to Hudson River, the mouth of Hudson River. So you need to put 7, false. Their original plan was to sail to the Hudson River, the mouth of the Hudson River, and that is on page 13. They did not try to go to Plymouth Harbor. They wanted to go to the Hudson River. While you guys are filling that in, I'm just going to read this little bit of extra. This is not in your magazine. This is just part of the Learn More online version. Because the Mayflower did not land where it was supposed to, the settlers were no longer under the authority of the Virginia Company. So that's the people who were paying for their trip. Well, they didn't go where they were supposed to, so you're not really in charge of us anymore. The charter they had been given was for a different location. This meant they had no government. As the settlers prepared to leave the ship, arguments arose between the Pilgrims and the other passengers. Remember, the Pilgrims are the people who were seeking religious freedom. The other passengers are the people just going for a new life, new adventure. Those who had not come for religious reasons threatened to leave the group and establish their own settlement. Pilgrim leaders felt that it was important to keep everyone together. Well, I probably would feel that too. There's only 102 of them. That's like, if we combined like 4th and 5th grade, and that's all we have. That's probably even more than 102. So the Pilgrims, the people in search of religious freedom, felt that it was important for them to be together. And I feel like that too, because more people working together, we can probably produce more goods or, keep ourselves safer. You're safer in a bigger group. They wrote a 200-word statement called the Mayflower Compact. A compact is an agreement. The adult men on board the ship signed it. The women, who had no legal rights at the time, did not sign, which is what we just talked about a minute ago. In the compact, the signers agreed to form a government and to obey any laws that would later be made for the good of the colony. So that's the good of everyone. The colony is what they're going to be making on land. In other words, they agreed to make their own laws. At a time when most people were governed by kings and other absolute rulers, this statement of self-government was by common agreement was unusual. It was an important step towards the principle of a democratic government. So we have a democracy here, meaning like the people choose who's in power and stuff. So all these, like in the United States, we do today. So it was just important that they decided to work together and form their own laws together and not just be told by a king or a queen or whoever else that this is what you're doing because I said so. So this was a different thing for all of them. Now we are at the bottom of 13, I think. No. Where are we at? Is this in Learn More too? Anyone see this one? All right, I think this one might be under Learn More too, which we might as well read because I love to read more. And it says, in the fall of 1621, the Pilgrims had their first successful harvest. That's good. They were able to make food. Successful is obviously what we want, right? With enough food, surviving the winter seemed likely. They declared a time of Thanksgiving. Two important Pilgrim leaders and the founders of the Plymouth colony, Governor William Bradford and Edward Winslow, wrote briefly about what happened. The governor sent out 4 men to shoot waterfowl, that's like geese, and wild turkeys for a feast. About 90 however we say that word in the Native American word, Wampanoag men arrived with their leader, Massasoit. They were invited to feast, which went on for 3 days. During that time, the Winnipegs killed 5 deer, which they presented to the governor. Many people think of this as the first Thanksgiving. However, it still wasn't until 1863 that Abraham Lincoln declared Thanksgiving a national holiday. This painting was made by Jenny Brownscombe in 1914, almost 300 years after the Pilgrims' Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving, if you've ever heard the story of Thanksgiving, how Pilgrims and Native Americans came together, happened in 1621. And we still celebrate it today. Now, continuing on to the bottom of 12. And it says, the first winter at Plymouth was hard. Well, of course it is. They don't have what they're used to. They're in a new climate. They don't have, they have to build everything they get. It's just probably not a good time. Many were sick from the hardships of the long voyage. Close to half of them died. So even though 102 made it there, almost half of them died that first winter. So they made that 2-month-long trip, but that doesn't mean they were out of the clear. In March, Samoset, an Binkan Indian, arrived at the camp. He later brought Tisquam and Foxtit, who was also called Squanto. Years later, the tea guy had been taken to Europe and sold into slavery by one of John Smith's men. He had escaped, gone to England, and returned to his homeland to find the people had all died of disease. The tea guy spoke English well and helped the Pilgrims survive by teaching them how to fish and plant native crops. So, I want you to highlight that their first winter was hard. And I would also like you to highlight close to half of them died. And then lastly, I want you to highlight that last sentence about the guy whose name starts with a T and that he was able to escape being captured and he was able to help the Pilgrims survive. Because he was already used to living in land like this. So go him. In the beginning of the scarcity of food, the leaders of the Pilgrim colony decided that the harvest would be divided equally among the families. That's nice. Later, in 1623, they divided the land equally. Because they were now farming their own land, individuals worked harder to get ahead. So that means when they began, no matter who worked hard or who did what, everyone got 6 pieces of corn, okay? But then later, just the land was divided. So if my land did better than Alicia's land, well, guess what? I had more corn than her. So individuals, depending on how hard they worked, depended on how much they had. The colony began to prosper from farming, fishing, and fur trading. In part, they succeeded because of T's help in signing a peace treaty with the local Wampans in 1621. Despite their success, for the first 10 years, the population was low. In 1630, there were about 300 colonists. So in 9 years, well, 7 years, they still didn't grow by too many. I just want you to highlight in the beginning, okay? If you have questions about the beginning of the Plymouth colony, where are you going to find it? Right there. And I also want you to highlight in 1630, there were about 300 colonists. If you are a pickup, I need you to pack up, which I think is just John today. And John, we're going to finish reading this last section. Feel free to just listen along as you pack up. In 1630, John Winthrop brought around 1,000 Puritans to settle in Massachusetts Bay, setting up a government in Boston. So Puritans would be people who believe a certain thing. So 1,000 new people, 1630. Whoop! But they're setting up in Massachusetts Bay, which is close to Boston. And they're going to set up their own government. The Puritans were a different religious sect from the Pilgrims. The arrival of so many people disturbed the relationship between the Indians and the settlers. The new settlers were not interested in peace with the Indians as the Pilgrims had been. Even the Plymouth colonists began to talk of war to push Indians out of New England. So in the beginning, the colonists were totally fine getting along with the Indians. They were like, oh yeah, they were here first. We don't want any problems. Let's have a peace treaty. But then, oh wait, I should have scrolled down. Sorry. But then once the other new settlers, 1,000 new settlers came in, they didn't care that the Indians were there first. They didn't care about peace. They decided, oh, you know what? Things aren't going to be as good. So that definitely caused problems for the Native Americans later. I want you to highlight in 1630, 100 Puritans to settle in Massachusetts. I also want you to highlight the Puritans were a different religious sect from the Pilgrims, meaning that they didn't come for the same religious reasons. They're a different religion, basically. And I also want you to highlight arrival of so many people disturbed the relationship between Indians and settlers. A lot of things changed really quick with so many people. Okay? I feel like did we answer another one of these?
Yeah.
Maybe we're going to do that tomorrow. All right, so tomorrow we are going to continue reading 14 and 15. We'll see if we get to 16 and 17. Probably not. All right, thank you guys for joining me at home. I will send you another email tomorrow with what you guys need to do. Of course, friends here, I need you to put away your social studies stuff till tomorrow. I'll see you guys later. Bye.